You are inside the No Morning Show here on TTT. I am Natalie Legore, just about 21 minutes after the hour of 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have Mark Edgehill, president of the TTCSI, here with us to talk about the reopening, finally, after 4 months, the reopening of the services sector. And don't ever forget, one of the most critical things for all of us to know, 60% of the GDP comes from this sector. Good morning to you, Mr. Edgehill.
Hi, good morning, Natalie.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So finally, we are reopened. What does that mean to the sector? And do we have the capacity of people? Do we have everybody back out? Or have we seen some closures along the way?
So first of all, yes, we have reopened, but not entirely. There are still some sectors that remain closed. Today, we see the opening of the spas, hairdressers, barbers, massage therapists, and those types of high-touch services. The real estate sector as well is one that has finally been allowed to reopen. So we have to thank the Minister of Health, the AG, and the Prime Minister for authorizing it. The sectors have a lot of difficulty in terms of the spas, hairdressers, and so on. They have been looking for grants to facilitate the losses that they've had over this long lockdown period and over the whole pandemic scenario, because their businesses, in particular being high touch, have not been one that has been able to operate properly. Other than that, the sectors that remain closed are sectors that are tourism based. So you have the tour operators, local and tourism based. You have the cultural and creative sectors. You have event planners, and of course, you're coming back to the bars and restaurants for indoor dining. So while we are seeing openings, we're still seeing some sectors that are closed that are still in dire straits in terms of their ability to sustain themselves and survive. Tour operators, for example, are expected over 50% to 75% or higher of closures in their sector. So it is everybody is back out to work who can be and who has not been forced to close their doors to business. So again, during this process, we don't have a crystal ball for the performance of the sector coming out of lockdowns and through the additional stages of the pandemic. But we will see the effects and in other words, who is and is not able to sustain themselves coming out of the lockdown.
Right, but have we been able to ascertain, how many businesses have closed in the services sector for good?
Again, that is something that we are only going to see once we reopen, because as it is, everyone has just been asking to be allowed to operate. So coming to how many people have actually closed their doors, that can only be realistically assessed when we see how many businesses actually reopen. And this is literally happening today as we speak.
So we saw the TTCSI agitate for the reopening of the real estate sector, and we got that. What about the creative sector, though, and as you said, tour operators, other kind of businesses that fall under services? Has there been talks with the government, between the TTCSI and the government, to find out, when we can see the reopening of these other areas of services?
Yeah, we have been in discussions. What I can say is the reason that TTCSI engaged with the real estate sector is because the Association of Real Estate Agents, that is a member of the TTCSI, had been reaching out on its own to try and achieve the opening, but was not gaining sufficient traction or consideration. So they went to the TTCSI as a more all-encompassing body for the services sector to push for the justification of why real estate should be open. So that's one of the reasons why you saw the focus from TTCSI on that. It was a request that came from that member association. With respect to the tourism sector and the cultural and creative and so on, we are in discussions with them. We have been having meetings to determine exactly what they want to see happen and, to work on issues like how they can operate safely. And one of the things that we have, recommended and have been speaking to is that assessments need to be done for each of these sectors whereby determining how each of these sectors can operate safely and mitigate risk to the public, so that there is, better or greater engagement and collaboration with the Ministry of Health to these different sectors. And I mean, I'm not only talking about the sectors that are still closed, I'm talking about sectors that are open as well. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're seeing enough monitoring and, collaboration with the Ministry of Health in respect of making sure that all these businesses that are reopening have protocols that are established and approved that are meeting the requirements to protect the public and to protect the employees of these companies as well.
And so that is definitely one of those critical issues that we have to pay attention to. If we don't have the monitoring, what is to prevent us from seeing those numbers go back up? And exactly. If you realize, even with the state of emergency in place and the curfew hours, is that we have not really gotten to that place. I think probably yesterday was the first time we saw the COVID numbers, being so minimal where we could say, okay, there's a kind of level that you could relax a little bit. But how does the TTCSI feel about the government's proposal to go to Parliament on Wednesday to extend the SOE, given the fact that we have vaccines, given the fact that we are reopening the economy and what it's going to need or take, to get that economy going?
So, as I said before, TTCSI is representative of the services sector, and that roughly, oversees in the vicinity of 650,000 people and individuals and businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. And with that, it's a large portion or almost a 50% cross-section of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's a very split opinion coming out of the TTCSI membership, where we have support for the SOE. We have people wanting the SOE to come to an end. And there are justifications on both sides, of course. So in terms of wanting the SOE to come to an end, the comments that are coming out is that they want data. They want data to prove that the SOE is working, all right? Now, with respect to the SOE, I think what the SOE is really doing with regard to the pandemic and the population is the lockdowns. But they're also saying that an SOE is not required to have curfews. So the lockdowns don't necessarily need a state of emergency. So they claim that it's giving the government too much control. Now, on the other side, from the government's perspective and from the health ordinance perspective, I think you all mentioned it earlier as well. Without the state of emergency, the government is not going to be able to implement the measures necessary to roll out, for example, the vaccine programs, and to have, again, as you all mentioned earlier, the various levels of medical practitioners to be authorized to administer vaccinations. And in discussion with the government about that fact as well, if the state of emergency comes to an end, in order to maintain what's currently being done by the Ministry of Health with respect to vaccines, they're going to have to make amendments to many different legislations, which of course will take a significant and extended amount of time. And again, when this process finishes or we get out of the pandemic, they're going to have to revert to the old legislation and go through that whole process again. So we have to pay attention. While some people feel the government may have too much power at this particular time, the mechanism is being used to facilitate the implementation of the health ordinance.
And the importance of that is that we're talking about, getting to some level of normalcy through vaccination. So the reality is that we need to be able to continue the mass vaccination as we've seen it over the past couple of months, so that we can get the economy going. Because I think it's no argument to say that the economy, even before the pandemic, was in a tough place. And then with the pandemic, even though we've been able to maintain our credit ratings to some level, at least an investment grade, is that things are really difficult. And it's going to need some serious push to see us over the hill, so to speak. So if the government keeps the SOE in place, the question then becomes, how does that help the economy?
the help to the economy is going to come from now. I've said before as well. If you can tap into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund to assist people with grants to try and bring us as close as possible back to where we were before the pandemic, which was already in a challenging economic downturn. We need to see more activity coming from the support of the government financially. Whereas, the lockdowns and the curfews and the state of emergency is not really doing anything to impact, the forward movement, and it needs to be looked at as, hindering the progress where you have the closures, the businesses that have not been able to reopen. One of the things coming out that I can mention that can assist in facilitating some kind of benefit if the government will allow is the tour operators, for example. If local sites were approved to reopen to facilitate local tourism, it would at least give them the opportunity to start testing their ability to operate safely, to then encourage international tourism to come back in and patronize those different local tourist attractions and tourist sites. So there are things that can be done. The government grants, as I said, making access to them a lot easier. Other jurisdictions literally give grants across the board with no criteria as citizens of a country to help them sustain their expenses. Whereas we have, a lot of hoops to jump through to qualify to get certain grants. And of course, you have a lot of people complaining that even though mechanisms are being put in place to assist by the government, people are not seeing them rolling out and reaching them. So we need to see more implementation, better handling, more monitoring, more collaboration. We need better engagement from the government so that the private sector can assist. We can help the government achieve the goals to move the country forward. So we need to have those conversations in order to, have a chance at recovery where both sides, the government and the private sector and the businesses and the service providers are happy, with the process and moving forward. And we're not all just being given instructions on what we're expected to do, and then we have to jump through the hoops, as I said.
But Mark, one of the things I always ask myself is how much the government can afford. And the reason I ask is that we have seen a significant increase in our debt to GDP ratio. We've also seen, a few less $1 billion in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. We've had a lot of borrowing, as well as we have less monies for importation cover. So when you look at all of these variables, and while I understand that the government has a responsibility to the population, how much of what we're trying to do can we realistically afford?
Well, that is a very good question, and that is, I think, what the government is struggling with right now. I don't think the finance minister or the prime minister has a very easy task at hand right now with respect to having enough funds coming into the country to facilitate, all that needs to be done, not only to continue its basic operations, but also to help the public.
So then we get back to the sectors that are still unopened. If that probably can be one of those mechanisms that the government can employ safely, so that we can get things to a level where it doesn't have to be dipping into the coffers so much. Is that what we need to do now with the vaccines in place if we maintain the SOE? Just reopen or a bit too early?
Well, you see, again, coming back to facilitation and collaboration with government, there are sectors, yachting services, I've been clamoring about that for quite a while, since taking up the role of TTCSI. But yachting, for example, if there is better collaboration with the government, these sectors can actually prove to them how they can contribute to GDP and how they can influence the inflows of foreign exchange.
Yeah.
And yacht services is one of those sectors that are extremely low-hanging fruit that, for operators as well, so to speak, once things are back open. But yachting, we had so much opportunity to bring in up to 500 vessels into Trinidad to spend US dollars on foreign exchange in our economy. And we literally, up to this weekend, we only have 10 vessels in. So what impact is 10 going to have versus 500?
Yeah.
So had there been better facilitation and collaboration and conversations to show the government, through the private sector, where we have those opportunities that we can tap into efficiently and immediately, those are the things that need to be done to have, more access to the foreign exchange that we need and to stimulate the economy a lot more.
So then my final question to you, why do you believe we're not having this facilitation of collaboration between the government and the private sector?
Again, I wish I knew. I can say that recently we have started having better conversations with the government. I do believe that the collaboration has been difficult during this pandemic because all the various aspects of government business have been impacted. A lot of pressure has been put on the system, not only through having the staff alternating days and all those things are putting a lot of pressure on how the government can function. So this is where, we can ask for the facilitation and point out to them at this stage that, listen, we're not seeing the collaboration or the facilitation, so let's get talking. It is, we have to understand the government is going about their business as best as they can under the circumstances and with the financial constraints as well. But unless we speak up, which we are and we have been, we need to influence that change and ask for their consideration to come to the table and have those discussions.
All right, Mark, we do have to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much for speaking with us this morning.
No problem. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Mark Edgehill, the president of the TTCSI, they're speaking to us, says this needs more collaboration because they can propose to the government ways in which they can, get some services, up and running to kind of help to facilitate the rebound of the economy.